Jaziun Patterson is now a Hawkeye, a big-time get for Iowa and Ladell Betts at running back. Plus, who are Iowa's top 5 most indispensable players for this season? And why isn't Kirk Ferentz mandating the vaccine at Iowa? We'll talk about it, his decision-making, and much more during Week 170 of Brada's Branded Thoughts. This is from the Hawkeye of the Storm.
Are you a Hawkeye fan living in Story County? Do you feel isolated, like you're alone in a maze of red? Well, you're not the only one. And that's why we here at StoryCounty.news have launched a brand new section of our website, From the Hawkeye of the Storm, which will feature our weekly podcast, Brada's Branded Thoughts, as well as other Hawkeye-related content for all you Story County residents who bleed black and gold, or if you live in Western Iowa, Eastern Iowa, or somewhere else other than Ames and you're a Hawkeye fan, we'd love your support. All of our content is free, so again, give our Facebook page a follow, give it a like, and give our Twitter page a follow as well, at From the Hawkeye on Twitter. The more likes, the more follows, the more support we get, the more content we can continue to push out, and it's all free. It's From the Hawkeye of the Storm, hosted by StoryCounty.news, for the best Hawkeye content in the area. Week 170, Brada's Branded Thoughts, and I'm joined by a guest who has not been on the podcast since we went YouTube. Well, you were on the podcast, but you were not on video. I don't believe... Oh, no, you were on video
I was
one
on
time.
Zoom, yeah.
You were on one time. We've had him on twice. One time, I think, over the phone, and then, of course, one time over Zoom. But now we are in person here for kind of a special edition of the podcast where we will sit down and talk Iowa football. This is a very pivotal time in fall camp. We've been releasing information through From the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube, as well as through Iowa at the Voice of College Football, which is our partnered channel with the Voice of College Football, Mark Rogers, and of course lots more to come on that channel in the coming months. But this fall camp is, I shouldn't say winding down because we've still got some time, but Alex, week 0, the first Big Ten game between Illinois and Nebraska is what? A little over a week away. I mean, we are really, really close now to Hawkeye football returning.
Yeah, I think 15 days is the actual number. So
For Iowa.
For Iowa.
So, and of course, we'll talk Iowa. We're going to talk specifically about some issues that have come up over the past week. I want to start out this podcast, though, by talking specifically regarding the commitment Iowa received this week in Deerfield Beach, Florida, running back Jaziun Patterson. And here's a kid who I know we talked about him during a reaction, cut in on, I believe that was Tuesday night. But I want to just take a moment to talk with you about him. 5'10", 190 pounds, although some websites list him differently. He talked a little bit with the local media down there just about how he struggled with weight last year during COVID. And, I made a comparison during our reaction to one of the more famous running backs of all time at Iowa in Sean Green. And then I heard some comparisons to kind of in a different direction, I should say. But I do believe Jaziun's a guy who's going to help Iowa from a recruiting standpoint, because here's a class that was behind the 8 ball, we know. They got Carson May out of Oklahoma at quarterback here in recent weeks. But Jaziun Patterson's a guy who I think can electrify a class that's been behind not only because of COVID, potentially because of some of the offseason issues last fall, whether people want to admit that or not. I think that's a possibility. Your thoughts on being able to get a guy like Jaziun, who's a 4-star by many different rating systems, I guess I should say. 247, I believe, has him at a 4-star level. Your thoughts on Iowa being able to grab him, and Iowa running back coach Ladell Betts with a huge win right off the bat?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's been kind of a tough year for recruiting, and I think that, he's a guy that if he can keep his weight up, 190 pounds is kind of the same deal that Akram Wadley dealt with. But if he can keep his weight up, he should be a valuable addition, and that's kind of a position where you want to have a lot of depth, and you can never have too many running backs, especially at Iowa because of the way they play. So it's a good addition, I think.
And we know he can gain weight because he did it last year, and kind of was different than what he wanted to be. He talked, again, with the local media about how he wants to be more of that elusive type running back, but I think he's sort of that hybrid that everybody wants. I look at guys in the NFL who are kind of that hybrid. First guy that comes to mind is Jaziun Patterson, who we know broke all kinds of records for Oklahoma and then, of course, with Minnesota. I know these are lofty comparisons, but maybe a bit of AP in him from a high school standpoint. And again, I made that comparison with Sean Green to a high school level because Sean was very close to what Jaziun is at this time in his career. So it's just a great get. And again, Ladell Betts obviously had solid footing in Florida. There's no question about that. So recruiting-wise, this is a huge step forward. And just for him in general, boy, this has got to make Hawkeye fans feel really good. The fact that they just nabbed a running back, this level running back, this quickly in the Ladell Betts era. Devin Hilson committed. Of course, he's on campus now in fall camp out of Des Moines North. I can't remember if Ladell had been hired at the time or not. I believe he had been, but it was real close in time in occurrence there. So just a huge get. I do want to talk a little bit more about where we're at right now with COVID. And I know, listen, I'm if anybody knows me, they know I get so tired of hearing about the pandemic, but it is still here. We are expecting full season. I don't know if there's any question we're going to get a full season. We're also expecting full stadiums. The Delta variant is causing issues, primarily for unvaccinated people. I think we both agree people should be getting the vaccine. But there have been some comments, and maybe you've heard this, maybe you haven't, if you live here in Iowa and you keep up with kind of the Iowa media. But we've heard some opinions out there from some of the Iowa media that, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but basically surprised that Kirk Ferentz hasn't mandated the vaccines for his players. Theoretically, he could. And I have my thoughts on this, but do you have anything to offer as it relates to Kirk Ferentz choosing not to mandate the vaccines? Last check-in, we were around 70%, which is much less than any other Big Ten team that we know of.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes down to his personal, beliefs and, how necessary that is. We know that he had COVID, so he should know as well as anyone the severity of the disease. So, he's more than aware of how that'll affect his guys, having players out and whatnot. So, I don't know. I mean, even if he doesn't necessarily mandate it, I have a feeling that if that's something that everyone's doing, they'll probably feel some kind of pressure to do it, regardless of if there's an official mandate or not. But
well, you would think so, but again, Nebraska may be the one exception, but Northwestern, last check, they were over 95% vaccinated. Wisconsin, over 90%. Kirk Ferentz said 70. He said not quite 70. So that's a concern to me. But here's why I think the Iowa media, not everybody, but I'm thinking of one or two specific people, and you can guess, if you don't know who I'm talking about, you can guess as to who I'm talking about in the Iowa media. But there were some opinions voiced about how Kirk Ferentz has not mandated it, and basically shame on him for doing that. First of all, whether we like it or not, it's turned into a political issue. It shouldn't be. There's no question the vaccine should not be a political issue, but it has turned into such. But here's why I believe Kirk Ferentz has not mandated the vaccine, and that comes down to one simple fact. Last summer, if you think back to what happened in June of last year, after George Floyd was brutally murdered, I think we'd all agree that that's what happened with George Floyd. It turned on Kirk Ferentz. Players kind of, I won't say revolted against the program, but came forward and expressed some concerns about where the program was at with Chris Doyle at the helm, and certainly Brian Ferentz was involved with some of those allegations. At times, Kirk Ferentz was accused of not being attentive enough to his players' needs. And so I think it's silly for anybody to look at Kirk and say, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but I've heard this viewpoint, well, we know Kirk's political leanings. This explains why he's not mandating the vaccines. Kirk got the vaccine. He was very clear at Big Ten Media Days he wants his players to get vaccinated, but he's not mandating it. Imagine him mandating this vaccine. And again, I don't want to turn this into a social or political issue, but if you've got African American players who are uncomfortable taking the vaccine, what does this say to not only those black players, but I think more so from an image standpoint, a perception standpoint, especially nationally? Kirk Ferentz tells these players, you have to get vaccinated or you're not playing. That's not a good look. So I think Kirk is playing his cards wisely here, and I think the media, oblivious as they act at times, should understand that he's walking on eggshells, even though we're over a year removed from last season's issues.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, that's the thing with a mandate is even if you don't have a mandate, that doesn't mean that players aren't going to be getting vaccinated. It's going to be up to them. It's going to be their choice, but they also realize what's at stake. I mean, these guys are, if they miss time, especially at a program like Iowa, if they miss time, they may not get another chance because there's usually always a guy right behind them. So, you would think that being in their best interest, they would not want to miss time, and that would be plenty of incentive. I'm kind of surprised the numbers aren't higher, even without the mandate, but yeah, I can see what you say about Ferentz. I mean, you're basically forcing players to get a vaccine, put something in their bodies. I can honestly see that point of view because it is a very personal thing with it's kind of a new vaccine technology and whatnot, and having a mandate is forcing them, and Kirk has been kind of on the hot seat for the past year, so I can see how that could be a factor.
And I don't agree with you totally that it's a new technology. I mean, it's been around. Coronavirus vaccines have been around, but
it depends on which one.
It's a new vaccine.
Yeah, I'm talking about the mRNA ones, but yeah, the other ones.
But even that technology has been around. I mean, was not a brand new technology. The building blocks of it, the foundation of it, was around prior to this virus.
Yeah, it's just never been rolled out in a vaccine anywhere. So, but yeah, there are other options too. It's not just the mRNA vaccines.
So that's my view on it. Again, I think, and again, this is not a widespread thing. I'm not trying to bash the Iowa media, but I think I was offended to a degree when I heard that. Well, shame on Kirk Ferentz for not mandating it. You got to understand these are some of the same media people who were on Kirk's rear about the issues last summer, and rightfully so. I mean, I have no issue. We're not talking about whether that was right or wrong. I have no issue with the fact that he was called out for certain things that he needed to fix. I think he's, at least from the outside looking in, he's making attempts to mend fences, and I think most players with Iowa who've been asked have at least said such to the media. I have a feeling they'd be honest right now at this point if things weren't improving. But I just think it's silly to act like, why would Kirk not mandate it? I think it's obvious why he wouldn't mandate it. It's because he's walking on eggshells. He would love for his players to get vaccinated, as he is, but forcing those black players to do something just after he's been accused of forcing them to cut their hair, forcing them to not wear earrings, forcing them to wear Iowa gear, is not a good look, whether it's a life-saving vaccine or not. And it is. I mean, you look at what the government is deciding in some respects, or many most cases, deciding that it's a personal choice. And it is. It's a personal choice, but it is a big deal whether people get vaccinated, not just for the people who get vaccinated, but for the people who choose not to. And, of course, that's on them that they get sick. But, again, we'll hopefully see that number go up. I think Kirk, I'm sure, behind closed doors is really encouraging his guys to get vaccinated because he understands that availability is going to be a huge, huge issue again this year if his players are not vaccinated. Hopefully the 30% that aren't starters. I mean, I would guess that some of them are, and that's a concern because, again, we have contact tracing. We've seen what's happened preseason with Nate Stanley, who, like it or not, if you know Nate Stanley or know of his family, they're very outspoken politically, so it's not a surprise that he is not getting the vaccine. Brandon Scherf didn't get the vaccine, but they both had to sit out preseason because of contact tracing. So this is what they're going to be up against if they choose not to get the vaccine. And all these players could have gotten the vaccine long by now. But, they've got opportunity. If you get it, say you get it tomorrow. We're recording this on the 20th. Say you get it tomorrow. You'd be mostly protected, I would guess, by the time the season starts. But we'll see. We haven't heard from Kirk in the last couple of weeks on the vaccine issue. And it really isn't the media's business to be asking him how many players. He offered it, and so, but again, I don't see Kirk mandating it, and I'm not even saying he should. So that's the first thing I wanted to address here. Again, lots more football-oriented discussions that we can have here. And one of the things I do want to talk about, and we previewed this on a previous show, I'm going to give my most indispensable players here. My 5 most indispensable players. And this is something that I didn't talk to you in advance about, so I kind of want to just get your analysis when I'm done with these 5 players as to whether you agree or maybe you throw someone else into the mix. And let's start with number 1. My number 1 most indispensable player for Iowa in 2021, and that is Spencer Petras. I know people would laugh at that because a lot of people want to see Deuce Hogan or Alex Padilla at the helm. But if Petras gets hurt, it is the biggest storyline with Iowa football. And it's normally it has the largest effect on any football team. So I think anybody who would argue this isn't really looking at this from a reality standpoint. If Petras gets hurt, Iowa's in trouble because Alex Padilla has not really had any game action. Certainly Deuce Hogan hasn't had any game action. Joey Labus, who's here, has not had any game action. Connor Kapisak, who I believe is still on the roster last I checked, he hasn't had any game action. So availability with Spencer Petras is huge. Obviously, we want to see a big jump from Spencer from an arms perspective. Can he tone down the fastball? Can he hit crossing routes at a more consistent rate? And can he cut down on boneheaded decisions that ended up in interceptions last year? So that's my number 1 player. My number 2 player, and again, you can kind of go a couple different directions with this. My number 2 most indispensable player is Tyler Linderbaum. If you look at the offensive line, I've preached for now 3 years or so, and even more, how important the interior of the offensive line is. We saw in 2018 Iowa repeatedly getting blown up on the inside. I believe it was it 18 or was it 19?
I would say 19.
Might have been 19. Michigan, Penn State come to mind, those games. Iowa's guards, no offense to Levi and Landon Paulson, were subpar that year. I think the interior is a lot better, although they do lose Kyler Schott. We'll talk about that here in a moment. At least for the time being, he's out. But Tyler Linderbaum is the anchor of that offensive line. He's a preseason All-American, likely the best center in the country, likely a first-round draft pick. They lose him, and he is just incredible. It's interesting watching some of the University of Iowa's fall camp tape that has been released here in recent time. This guy's one. He really is. We said the same thing kind of about Tristan Wirfs. Said the same thing about AJ Epinesa. This guy's a generational talent, and people better enjoy having him now. He is a freaking beast. You see him running guys over. If you just go on Hawkeye football on Twitter and watch some of these highlights. And again, they're highlights I get of fall camp, but I mean, he was tossing Noah Shannon around like a rag doll, and Noah Shannon is probably a starter this year on the defensive line for Iowa. I don't think that's an indictment on Noah. I think that's a compliment to Tyler Linderbaum. So Tyler would be my second most indispensable player at center, and normally I don't think we would probably rate a center as the second most indispensable player, but again, because of some of the inexperience, they lose Kallenberger on the offensive line. They lose Larrick Jackson on the offensive line as well, and then Kyler Schott's out right now. I think Tyler Linderbaum is number 2 on my list. Number 3 at this point, my third most indispensable player, I'm going to go to Tyler Goodson. The reason he's not number 2 is because of who's behind him. Ivory Kelly-Martin looks really good right now. He looked good on Kids Day here a couple weeks ago. He's a guy who has experience. I think you can trust him with the football. We know he can catch out of the backfield. So obviously you want your running backs to stay healthy. Tyler Goodson is that good that he has to be on the list regardless of depth. But at the same time, I think he goes down for a couple of games. I think you're going to see Ivory Kelly-Martin carry the ball 20, 25 times. Hopefully a guy like Gavin Williams can step up as well. But right now, Tyler Goodson's my second most indispensable player on this team. Number 3, and these last 2 that I'm going to give you are actually kind of tandems. Number 3, what did I say? Number 3? Yep. Number 4. Number 4 is the defensive back tandem of Matt Hankins and Riley Moss. And specifically as it relates to these first 2 games, I know on the last show I talked a little bit about how important it was for Iowa to develop these defensive linemen and develop depth at defensive line. For these first 2 games, you face 2 quarterbacks, and Michael Penix and Brock Purdy, who can run. We know Iowa's traditionally had problems with scrambling quarterbacks, so they've got to get those defensive linemen ready. But the reason why Hankins and Moss are on this list is if you watch what Indiana did last year against Ohio State, you watch them throughout the year, this is a team with tremendous talent at wide receiver. Freifogel, star wide receiver for Indiana. He's the guy that Iowa fans are going to be comparing, I think, to David Bell at Purdue. He's that good. Had, I believe, 2 straight games over 200 yards receiving last year, including one against Ohio State. They've got, I think Marshall's the other wide receiver who's back for Indiana. And they wear the same number. Bell and Freifogel wear the same number. And he was wide receiver of the year last year when a lot of people thought it'd be Rashad Bateman in the Big Ten. So Freifogel is going to be a key. I know Phil Parker doesn't like to trade running cornerbacks to each side of the field. He likes to kind of play that system where he keeps each running back on one side of the field. And I actually think that's okay, especially with Freifogel, because Indiana, I can see Tom Allen, again, hodgepodging Marshall, Freifogel, and mixing things up there. But when's the last time we've been able to say, hey, we've got 2 cornerbacks who are not only really good, but are probably equally really good? I don't know who you'd put. Who would you rate ahead, Hankins or Moss? Who's better right now? I don't know. I can't answer that question. So that, to me, that says, hey, you line up on this side, you're going to get Riley. You line up on this side, you're going to get a 5th-year senior in Matt Hankins. So I think that's key. Can they keep both of them healthy? Both those guys being healthy, because then if you don't, then you're talking about, is Terry Roberts ready? Is Jamari Harris ready? Sebastian Castro? Somebody else in the backfield, or I should say in the defensive backfield, will have to step up. And especially for this first game and even the second game, because we know what Brock Purdy can do with his arm, they're going to need 2 healthy cornerbacks with the experience of Hankins and Moss. And that leads us to our 5th most indispensable player. And again, I'm going to go a tandem. Linebacker, Seth Benson, Jack Campbell, Brian Ferentz, who, of course, offensive coordinator, but he made a comment here in the past few days about how he believes Jack Campbell is one of the best linebackers he's seen ever. And he just says he's just amazing. He's just a beast. That's a huge compliment. We saw physically what Jack Campbell could do last year, but Benson and Campbell got hurt early, and we saw what happened against Purdue. He struggled. Julius Brents in the defensive backfield struggled against Bell. Oftentimes, Purdue was able to get mismatches with Barrington Wade trying to guard Bell. One of the touchdowns comes to mind in the end zone, back of the end zone, where Wade was supposed to, I assume, flash back. But again, Barrington Wade should never have to cover any wide receiver, let alone David Bell. So I'm going to go with Jack Campbell and Seth Benson together. They need those 2 guys healthy, because when they came back, Iowa won 6 straight games. So that's a big key to, and we saw what Jack Campbell did against Wisconsin too. Huge interception in that game to seal the deal. So I want to go honorable mention, then I'm going to throw this over to you for a moment to kind of get your thoughts. Honorable mention here is Dane Belton. Had him off the list, had him on the list. Then I thought, now, again, linebacker, cornerback primarily, but we don't know who else can play cash. We've heard Matt Hankins can maybe play cash, but if Dane Belton gets hurt, Hankins slides up, then you lose somebody at corner. Are they comfortable enough with Jamari Harris or Terry Roberts? That's, I think, still to be seen. So Dane Belton would be honorable mention. And after that, maybe Tyrone Tracy. The reason why I wouldn't have put Tracy on the list is because Iowa does seem to have depth at wide receiver right now. Not a ton of experience, but you got Tracy Reganey, Charlie Jones, and then you got a couple freshmen who have looked good in Keegan Johnson and Arlen Bruce the fourth. So I guess I'll throw this to you. Any arguments to the list? Anybody you'd add or maybe take off?
Well, I mean, if we have to, what's the maximum number of players you can put in one spot? Because you have 2 in each spot, and 3 and 5
positions. You can only have 1 position per spot, I guess.
Okay,
we'll make that rule.
Yeah, that's tough, I guess. I mean, I might use 2 spots on offensive lineman, on tackle and guard. I mean, if you consider that 1 position, but if I could, I'd put the whole offensive line in 1 position, because I think that's, so important in any football team. But other than that, I think your list is pretty good. I'd probably move Goodson up to 2, and I'd keep Petras at number 1.
So who's Linderbaum at 3 then?
Well,
You're just moving the whole line there.
I would like to move the whole
line. So Linderbaum, you don't think deserves a spot by himself?
Well, if I could have the whole line, then I can get them all in one. So.
Well, yeah, and for anybody who didn't hear, Kyler Schott was hurt jumping off a hay bale. He was baling hay at his Midwest, I believe, Iowa home, and he messed up his foot. He's going to be out for the first few weeks of the season, or at least the first couple of weeks, it sounds like, according to Kirk. That's the one significant injury we've heard about so far out of camp. His Kyler shot is out, and it didn't even occur during camp. Heard rumblings that Kayvon Merriweather was a little banged up. Haven't heard a whole lot more. Now, Kirk is going to stay hush-hush. I mentioned that last week. That's okay. But that was my 5th biggest need for Iowa during fall camp last week, was staying healthy. They've got to stay healthy, because if they don't, who knows what Iowa's going to... those first 2 weeks are huge. It's just, fall camp's huge. And I want to move to something, speaking of injuries, that I did want to address on this episode of the podcast. And that is something Kirk Ferentz said during Big Ten Media Days that concerns me. Okay? And we knew Kirk Ferentz felt this way about Iowa football, about running backs. And I don't have the exact quote in front of me, so I'm going to paraphrase. But he basically said that his running backs wouldn't be taking too many hits this fall during camp. And I get it. He's trying to ensure the physical safety of Tyler Goodson and Ivory Kelly-Martin. The problem with that is Kirk Ferentz has sort of indicted that sort of a mindset in the past. The NCAA continues to take practices away to protect the players, but as Kirk says, and I believe, was it Hayden Fry who said it originally? I don't know where the quote originated, but he basically has said, to be good at football, you have to play football. So taking days away from contact is not good, or basically contact days. I shouldn't say just taking practices away, but basically days where they can actually make contact. But here's Kirk saying, well, we're going to have very few hits on our running backs. I get what he's saying. The problem is, we saw last year against Purdue, Iowa struggling at times with ball security. And how are running backs... We know that Sargent at times had problems, usually very sure-handed, as is Tyler Goodson. But you just worry, it's 2 games early on with very strong defenses. Indiana's a complete team, that's why they're top 20 in the country. So is Iowa State, that's why they're preseason top 10. Solid defenses. One of them's on the road with a quarterback who's never played a true road game with a crowd. To me, how do you get these guys ready if they're not taking hits? Ball security is my biggest concern with that statement from Kirk. Again, especially in games where there's going to be a small margin for error because they're against 2 really good teams. We're not making any predictions today. That we'll say that for next week. But that's a concern of mine at this point. And again, we're just seeing little clips out of practice. Maybe they're taking more hits behind closed doors than I'm imagining. But if they are not taking hits in fall camp, or they're only taking hits, a fourth of the time, that's concerning to me, even with 2 experienced running backs in Tyler Goodson and Ivory Kelly-Martin.
Well, I guess that kind of begs the question what he means is he just instructed his players to...
Yeah, they've got no contact jerseys on.
Okay.
So,
well, I can see the thing with the ball security. I mean, that's a definite factor. It's not like they're missing practice. It's not it's not the entire game, but it is a factor where maybe they get into a bad habit of not, securing the ball quite as much as they would if they knew they were going to get hit. So hopefully he mixes in a little of that.
Well, how do you? I know they do ball security drills, as everybody does, but how do you simulate tackle? I mean, Kirk would say the same thing, I think. How do you simulate a tackle and holding onto the ball if you're never tackled?
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're never tackled, but I'm saying if you're limited, if you're behind, then you're at risk to me.
Yeah, I hope that they still play some contact, to keep them honest, so that I could see taking away half of their time at taking contact. But if you took it all away, then maybe bad habits could crop up. So hopefully he doesn't do that.
And again, I want to go back for a second before we move on here. Iowa State's got the best defense in the Big 12. I know there's a question about that. Oklahoma, we know offensively is traditionally better, but that's the best defense in the Big 12. Indiana's a really good defense. If you watch the game against Ohio State, they were getting in the backfield and putting pressure on Fields, forced him into a couple of really bad throws in that game. And let's remember, they were down by 4 touchdowns against Ohio State, came all the way back in that game and had a chance up until the last play to tie it. Michael Penix is expected to be healthy. This is a very, very tough start. And I alluded to it earlier with David Bell. This first game against Indiana reminds me very much of the first game against Purdue last season for a few reasons. A, It's a conference game right out of the bat, which is very strange for a 12-game schedule. Of course, last year it happened because it was an 8-game schedule and the non-conference got eliminated. That's the first reason. But B, it's an Indiana team, as Purdue is, and I think they're very much built like a better version of Purdue. If you remember last year, Aiden O'Connell was the Purdue quarterback. Decent quarterback, was able to get David Bell the ball enough, and of course, their bruiser at running back was able to run through Iowa's defense minus the Iowa's linebackers that game, and ultimately that's kind of what did Iowa in, along with, I believe, a fumble from Mekhi Sargent. But they're built the same way. I mean, they love to throw the ball. I think Penix threw the ball 50-plus times a couple times last year in a single game. They've got number 3 at wide receiver, same, 5'11", 6-foot style wide receiver who just catches everything. He's got speed, got athleticism, got great hands in Freifogel. So kind of like David Bell in that regard. And again, it's right out of the bat. Now the good news is it is at home. That's an advantage where last year Iowa was at Purdue game 1. But we just know how consequential Big Ten games are, even though it is a crossover game against Indiana. To me, this is a very similar game to Purdue last year. Your thoughts on facing sort of the similar style right out of the gate? We have not, again, last year we had it, but it was Purdue and Northwestern, although those were the only 2 losses last year. We didn't expect those games to be, the biggest games of the season. And if you watched an episode of our podcast a couple weeks ago where I ranked games by importance, I don't place Iowa State very high on the total poll of importance, but as far as level of difficulty, these 2 games might be 1 and 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a few different factors last year. I thought maybe Iowa was less ready compared to some other teams in the Big Ten because of the crazy situation with the canceled season and that whole thing. But also, like you said, being at home is a huge advantage. I think that'll help a lot. I mean, last year it wasn't a blowout game or anything like that. It was just one of those games that they just could never, they could never really get a foothold in. And I feel like they should be better prepared this year. They're going to be at home. They know what's coming. To me, it just seems like Iowa's a team that probably is more damaged by uncertainty than other teams are for some reason. It seems like they're more of a fundamental team, old-fashioned team in that way. So I don't think it'll have the same outcome. Even if it does, I don't think it'll be for the same reasons anyway. So hopefully it'll be different this year.
And again, you made a comment earlier today talking about it. Doesn't feel like Iowa football is this close, but it is. And, it's going to be interesting to see if we hear any more about injuries. As far as Kyler Schott is concerned, who replaces Kyler? I mean, we'll talk about the roster next week on the podcast. We'll talk about the depth chart. But I said it a couple months ago, I don't love the idea of Cody Ince sliding out to tackle. I think that's likely to happen anyways. But if you can get Mason Richmond or even like a David Davidkov, we've heard good things about Connor Colby. Again, I know freshman, I get it, true freshman. But Cody Ince really was elite last year on the interior of that offensive line. You've got Linderbaum in the middle. You want Kyler Schott at one of the guard positions. He's smaller, so he's not going to be a tackle probably. I'd be shocked if he gets any tackle reps, even if Iowa were to get decimated at that position. Cody Ince and Kyler Schott. Justin Britt, he's big enough to maybe be, I don't know if he's taking reps at tackle or not. And then Jack Plum. Jack Plum's the natural tackle, so you stick Jack Plum out there, maybe at left tackle to replace Alaric Jackson. I think most people think Cody Ince is going to be that other tackle, and then you play Britt at guard. But somebody's going to have to play in Kyler Schott's spot, and again, arguably the 2 most difficult games. So we'll see where Kyler's injury is moving into the season. I'm high on Mason Richmond. Tom Kakert, a good friend of ours from HawkeyeReport.com, is also high on Mason, but we don't know where he's at. Kirk did make a point to point out Connor Colby's development, who I believe was an early enrollee, so he got a head start on some of the true freshmen during the offseason as well. So your thoughts maybe on Kyler being hurt early on? That's not the position that you want to see injuries at offensive guard.
No, I just hope he gets back quick because that is an area that still, I think, seared in our minds from a couple years ago, having so much trouble there. So hopefully if he does spend time out, there'll be somebody who can step up, but you want to see him on the field.
Yeah, and I think it was clear at Kids Day that Petras is the quarterback. It was clear to me before, because I just didn't see Kirk making a change unless he's stinking it up during an actual game. But Padilla and Ogun look far behind Petras right now, and Petras looked better at Kids Day than he did during the 2 open practices we saw in the spring. So I think there's lots to be excited about right now. Of course, we're just excited football's back. We heard a report today. This will be the final thing we mentioned before we log off here for week 170 of the podcast. We did get a report earlier today from The Athletic, Nicole Auerbach, reporting that the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12 will be announcing an alliance soon. No details yet as far as what that means. I don't think it means all 3 conferences are merging, but I do think it means that 3 conferences are going to be working together with TV contracts, with scheduling, to combat what the SEC is doing with grabbing OU, grabbing Texas as soon or as late as 2025. But that really begs the question now, where does Iowa State go? I'm big on Iowa State joining the Big Ten. I know a lot of Iowa fans hate that idea. I think, people say, well, you're not opening up any TV markets and you're not opening up any, regionally, blah, 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 with these basically just centering around TV markets and revenue. Again, AAU school, they fit the educational and academic requirements that the Big Ten seeks, as does Kansas, but the football program is as strong as it's been. Campbell's turned down NFL offers. He's here to stay for now if they stay in a major conference. If they go to the Mountain West or the MAC, he's out. However, again, competitively, they are right with Iowa right now, and they have been the last 2 years. I know Iowa fans don't want to agree with that. They haven't beaten Iowa since 2014. I get it. I'm an Iowa fan. I love to point it out. I live in Ames. But that is not a bad move for the Big Ten, in my opinion. Do they open up a new TV market? No. But TV markets are overrated right now. You have a lot more streaming capacity with Hulu TV, Fubo TV, YouTube TV, ESPN Plus, Disney, all those things. So that's not as big of an issue as it was when Maryland and Rutgers were added to the Big Ten. Penn State was added to the Big Ten. It would help Iowa if they could. It would help the Big Ten if they could join forces with the ACC, because we've heard rumblings that maybe Penn State would be interested in joining the Big Ten or the ACC. I can't get my conferences straight this evening, but I don't think that'll happen. But again, there also have been reports that Clemson was wanted by the SEC, and why wouldn't they want him if they're trying to build a super conference? Clemson joining the SEC would be an indictment on a lot of teams. What's the future if this report is true? And again, doesn't mean they're merging, but it does mean they're forming an alliance. The last of the Power 5 teams, or Power 5 conferences who are left out here, is the Big 12. What does the Big 12 do if this happens? Where do they go? Where do they turn? Is Bob Bowlesby in that entire conference? I mean, I was not scared for their... I don't care. I mean, the Big 12 is what it is. I don't want to see Iowa State join the MAC. I don't want to see them join the Mountain West. To me, it would kill the Iowa-Iowa State rivalry, which I cherish. What does the Big 12 do if this report is true?
I'm not sure what the Big 12 does in that situation regardless, because there's not going to be much left. But I agree with not wanting to see ISU, go to a tiny little conference. I mean, you want to see them strong, I think. You don't want to... you want to see Iowa win every year, but you want to have them beat a really good team, and that's what they've been doing, basically. I mean, Iowa State's been good, and in some ways has been better than Iowa. In their own conference, they've been taking out some pretty big teams past couple of years, so you want to see Iowa facing a really good team. And just as a resident of Iowa, you don't want to see ISU in some little dinky conference. So, yeah, I'd agree with that.
You okay with Kansas joining the Big Ten? Because I haven't talked about this. There were real reports that Kansas was almost a lock for the Big Ten. It surprised me a little bit given the dumpster fire that they are from a football standpoint. We know basketball-wise they've been dominant, but they're facing FBI allegations and an investigation still with Bill Self. Regionally they make sense. They are an AAA school, only one of two, and the other one being Iowa State. But we've heard reports of that happening. Can the Big Ten benefit from Kansas joining the Big Ten with literally no pulse from a football in which we know is the life and blood of every conference.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a tough team because they're so good in basketball and so bad in football. It's just a kind of a weird dichotomy. So I'm not sure how that would affect. On one hand, you gain a team that's typically
but is facing scandals.
Yeah, true. So we don't know where that'll go, but typically is a major power in basketball, and in football you're not really gaining anything. But who knows? I mean, maybe that could push them into being a better team. We see kind of these trends with different conferences where with the Big 12 you don't have too much of a focus on defense and that kind of thing. I think that has to change if you're going to be playing in a different conference like the Big 10. So maybe they would become a different team, in football.
They put a lot of money into that facility down in Lawrence. They tried to bring Les Miles in. There was some scandalous stuff going on there. He didn't work out. Now they bring in the guy, I believe, from Buffalo. They're trying. I mean, Mark Mangino got him into a top 25 position here, 10, 12 years ago. It just hasn't, and then he had issues. So it hasn't been able to really work down there. But again, I'm not opposed to it. I'm more for Iowa State. But the Big 12 may be left out to dry. If this report is true, Big 12 may not have a home, and that means where does Oklahoma State go? Where does Baylor? Baylor is really in trouble. If you're talking about a team that's in trouble, they are in trouble. I think probably the only options really left if the Pac-12 and the ACC and the Big 10 sort of abandon the Big 12. I think the American is probably where a lot of these teams are going to end up. You're going to end up with Cincinnati, Houston, South Florida. So I don't know. We'll see. Eastern Carolina. There is a problem. If I was an Iowa State fan right now, I'd be very, very nervous. And it's too bad for them. I'm not a hater of Iowa State. I mean, I do in a way, but not really. I mean, I don't. I feel bad for Iowa State fans because here they are, the most hyped season in the history of their program, and it's kind of overshadowed by all this realignment stuff. Not knowing when OU and Texas are leaving, could be as early as next season if they pony forth the money. They don't know if they're playing major football after a couple years from now. I mean, I can't imagine being in that position, again, amidst the fact that this team is in a position to maybe make noise nationally this year.
Yeah, it would be a strange place to be. I haven't really talked to any ISU fans, but I'd kind of like to see what their general.
Got an old friend that I was in high school with. Tried to get him on the podcast. I'm still trying. He doesn't want to go on. So, but I'm trying to get him. He's a big Iowa State fan, so I'd be interested to get their reaction to it. But man, I am excited. We're gonna get those Crew Crow boys on next week. Any of our podcast listeners who haven't listened past, well, it's been a year since we've had them on. Some good friends of ours always hop on every year. We, all four of us, hop on to talk about. We do a season preview show, so we're going to break down the depth chart. We're going to break down the roster, the schedule. We're going to make our final predictions of the season. So it's going to be fun next week here at From the Hawkeye of the Storm, and this will be part of Brada's Branded Thoughts. So Alex, thank you for hopping on here this evening, and we will continue to filter out content to our channel From the Hawkeye of the Storm. You can also catch our podcast, today's episode, as well as other episodes through Spotify, Anchor, through Apple Podcasts, through Google Podcasts, basically anywhere, Stitcher, anywhere you listen to podcasts, get your media fix. You can listen to Brada's Branded Thoughts. Just search From the Hawkeye of the Storm. We're hosted by StoryCounty.News and Names, but we are From the Hawkeye of the Storm. Also want to put another plug in for what we have coming this fall with the Iowa at the Voice of College Football YouTube channel. If you haven't gone over to Iowa at the Voice of CFB, College Football, go over there now and subscribe to that YouTube channel, because we are going to be going live after every single Iowa football game with the one and the only, the legendary Iowa assistant coach, Don Patterson. Don is an absolute genius as it relates to football, as it relates to analytics. He still does analytics for Kirk Ferentz and his staff. He'll give us a bit of an inside glimpse into these games, certainly into preparation and game planning and scheming. Our plan is we hope to have Don on the week leading up to the Indiana game to sort of kick things off, and then we'll have him on every single post game after the games. So it's just going to be a great time. And again, those live shows will be over at Iowa at the Voice of College Football, Iowa at the Voice of CFB. So go over there, subscribe here, and you will get continued content throughout the rest of the season. Iowa football, about 2 weeks away, Alex. So thank you for joining us. We will talk to you soon. Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm, Alex Brada as well. We will talk to you soon. Go Hawks.